Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about boundaries. This can be a hot button topic, but we're hoping to discuss it in such a way that leaves people feeling encouraged and with more wisdom. Join us as we discuss the areas where boundaries are helpful and appropriate, and the areas where boundaries can be misused. Let's get started. Listeners, today we're talking about boundaries. This can be a hot button topic, but we're hoping to discuss it in such a way that leaves people feeling encouraged and with more wisdom. At least as much wisdom as the three of us have if we pool all our ideas together, which we're real people. We're not clinical psychologists, but these are real life boundary topics. Girls, what do you guys think about this topic in general?
I appreciate you saying that. First of all, is like, we're not experts. I feel like with the internet, so many people claim to be experts now, and you have to be really careful what you're taking as authoritative information. And so I think this is just going to be us discovering what boundaries look like in your family, or, or, how we deal with them.
I know. I feel like this is a conversation that I naturally have with friends or family or my kids. And so with us, it's always just a conversation. Like, this is the topic of our conversation, and we're just going to share that with you.
Right. And when we first thought about doing this topic, we've actually thought about it a couple times. And I think we may have even gotten listener requests on it, but we always thought, well, how could we have a topic about boundaries? Someone's going to be offended in our life. But we're trying not to use any real life examples. And I honestly don't really have like huge issues with boundaries that I can think of with anyone in my life. But I'm just saying that sometimes it can be a topic fraught with the potential for offending someone. So we hope that listeners know that we are talking in generalities. And I don't really have like this huge issue, but I hear it come up more and more. And especially on social media, I hear it come up more and more. And then I'm always fearful and want to avoid problems with boundaries. So I guess more than anything in my life, I want to avoid problems with boundaries in the future. So I feel like discussing it now might help.
Yeah. And sadly, I do know some people that are having issues with that in their families. And it's just kind of put me on high alert, like, oh, is this something that could happen to our family? Like, this is, there's some estrangement in these families, and it's kind of a scary thought.
Yes. Now, do you guys think that boundaries has always been a topic? Because I don't really remember talking about this even when I got married, almost 30 years ago. Like, I don't really remember talking about this amongst my friends. Like, when do you think this became a thing?
I don't know, because I was thinking, even 20 years ago, like, I needed to develop some because I felt like the trend was, or at least in my own life, in my own immaturity, it was to kind of say yes to everything, that I thought those were the healthy people. And then I had to learn. I was like, wait, no, that's not actually healthy. And so boundaries became something I had to learn and a positive thing. And now I feel like the pendulum has swung so far where boundaries is kind of used as a gate. And that gate is thrown up so often and so fast. And so I really think there's a healthy place there. But I don't feel like that was kind of a topic 20 years ago.
No, I think what we're all familiar with is setting limits for yourself, like what's good for you and what's not. But boundaries feels a little bit threatening, like it could be used against you. And it just seems to have become maybe more popular as the focus towards self and victimhood. I don't know. Somehow I think that's all kind of wrapped up together. And I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate times to set boundaries when there's abuse and neglect and harm. And, I'm not talking about that. But people are just so easily offended. I mean, I remember going to family events with distant, like, cousins, aunts, and uncles and things like that, and getting comments about how tall I was as a fifth grader. And it was hurtful and it was embarrassing. And, people would say, well, how tall are you going to get? And, I felt like, well, should I be just in the circus? I mean,
I'm a freak of nature. What do you want?
Right. And that was a totally inappropriate thing. But today I feel like people would say, well, you don't even have to go to that event,
Right. Or
like
Those
you don't need
people.
to.
those
don't need to
people
be
are
there.
out of your life now. Or
Yeah, for your mental health, don't go. And it's
Right.
haven't like do we really need to give people that much control over how we feel? Like now we laugh about that.
right. Well, let's talk a little bit about boundaries, because I think even just for the purpose of this discussion, we should probably decide, what purpose do boundaries even serve in relationships? Because I do think, like you said before, Mindy and Julie, like boundaries used to be about setting limits for ourselves. And so they served a good purpose. And now boundaries have become kind of a weapon that we use to strike each other over the head. And so now I don't know that they're serving a good purpose, but I really do think that the intention of boundaries is good and we do need them. So what purpose do you guys feel like boundaries serve in a relationship?
Well, I was thinking about, I remember talking to some sort of city official about a playground and a fence. And I'm starting there because the question was raised, well, why is the fence there? And I guess there had been research done about children. When they see a fence, they play in the entire yard up to the fence. When there's no fence, they stay right up next to the playground. They don't have the freedom to venture to where that boundary would have been. And so I also thought about a road, and we have yellow lines and white lines, and it allows us to keep moving forward different directions without hitting one another. And so those were the kind of the physical, visual examples that I think that boundaries in a healthy way gives you freedom to live amongst others, even if you're going a different direction.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I did too think about the purpose of actual physical boundaries like fences and walls and things like that. And basically, they define where your property ends and where somebody else's starts. And like even in a tight-knit community, everybody wants their own space. Like you think about your child's bedroom, if they share a bedroom. There's a line,
Right.
line down the middle, or in the car, even in the back seat. There's a boundary between the two kids. So I think of the boundaries that we're talking about as a distinction of where I end and someone else starts. And they define kind of what's my responsibility and what's not my responsibility. And then I thought, well, fences have gates. They're not barriers. They should allow things in and out. And I also thought about they don't have to be permanent. Like a gate could be up for a short time and then opened again. And,
Right.
Yeah. I didn't really think about physical things, but I just thought about what purpose does a boundary serve. And I just feel like boundaries help define the level of intimacy in a relationship. So like your casual friends, you're going to have a different boundary level than you are for your closer family members. I think they just help people know like what questions they can ask, what expectations they can have of you, topics of conversation that you can bring up, how often you can call or text. Like there's some people you can call, doesn't matter how late it is at night, but then you also have relationships where the boundary is, okay, well, you know what? It's after work hours, so I'm not going to bother that person. Or, I know they're home with their family now and we're not that close. And so I don't want to interrupt that time. Like, I just feel like the boundaries are kind of known in a lot of relationships, and they kind of are the flags that say, this is how intimate I am with you. And so I feel like they do serve a good purpose. Like you said, they keep people kind of on social tracks, and like things can be pleasant because you are all observing different boundaries. Now, sometimes we get a little off track. Maybe we've called someone too late, or maybe sometimes that someone that you consider very close to you, but then they're afraid to ask you for help. So you think, oh, I wonder why they feel like there's this big boundary line. Like, I thought we were closer than that. Have you guys ever had that experience, like where you thought the boundaries were different?
Well, I want to go back to something you just said, like when you said you have different boundaries with different people depending on how close you are, and like the phone call analogy. Don't you think those are kind of just understood? Like you probably don't have to tell all your friends, I do not accept calls after 11 o'clock at night. And if you do, there's consequences. Like, I feel like that's where boundaries have led. Like there will be consequences if you cross this line. Like, I think the onus should be more on ourselves to just anticipate in some ways.
Right.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that I'm not even saying that these boundaries are ever spoken. I just think in general they're observed, and
but I do think
sometimes
we're spoken more.
Oh yeah, I guess maybe they're being spoken more.
I think you're always testing, especially, your boundaries are going to change as you age. Other people's boundaries change, seasons change, whatever. So, but I mean, some simple example is just texting and how fast you respond. And honestly, you're always kind of testing a relationship and even your family, that you're kind of towing the line. And if you're not going to answer, text after 9, then just don't answer. And then your family's like, oh yeah, I've learned that when I text Mindy after 9 p.m., oh yeah, she's asleep. Because that's you guys. Like, you could text me at midnight. I could care less about it. I'm asleep. It's only 11 o'clock your time. And then I'll text you back in the morning. But I think that you live your boundaries, or, without having to necessarily speak them out loud, and people kind of learn. And then, if it changes, it changes. But I think it's just the attitude behind it, too.
If somebody asked me to write out, like, how some people have those signs like rules for our household, we do such and such. Like, if someone said, write out your boundaries. I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to start. Like, just, if I like something or not. That'd probably be my rule.
Right. You can look at my face. Do I look happy? No.
Have I responded well in the past to that? Okay. Then choose accordingly.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my boundaries. If someone said, what are your boundaries? I would say, I don't know, probably the same boundaries that 99% of the world has. I don't know.
Right. Common courtesy.
Yeah.
Right. And and if you're going to bed early one night, turn your ringer off. And that's on you. Again, I think
there is some responsibility.
There's some responsibility.
Yeah, for sure. So anyways, I think we all kind of know, at least our generation, we kind of know what our boundaries are, but maybe we don't feel like this huge onus to broadcast them to the world. And maybe we haven't even really thought about them that much ourselves. So I don't know.
But when your boundary lines are crossed, I tell you that.
You do. And we're going to get to that. But when I say the word boundaries, like what does that evoke in you? How do you feel? Because when I hear the word boundaries, I'm kind of conflicted with how I feel. Like on one hand, I feel like, ooh, what am I missing out on? There's a boundary. I'd really like to see what's on the other side of that boundary. And on the other hand, I feel a sense of safety because like you said before, Mindy, just like kids, like we feel like, oh, okay, well, I can do all of this over here. All of this is open to me and I don't need to worry about that this is offensive to that person or that I'm bothering them because they've opened up all this for me. Like I know what to expect. But then also the other little devil on my shoulder says, oh, well, what am I missing out on? So I don't know. Did you guys have those two conflicting emotions?
Yeah, I think it's important that we know what we're talking about when we say boundary, because in some ways it can sound threatening, but I think in general, they're necessary and good. So I think it's just our interpretation, which is what we're going to talk about. Because obviously they are, if they're intended to make the relationship better, then it's good and it's healthy.
Yeah.
And they can be protective from other people, but they can also be protective from yourself. When you set limits on yourself. And God asks us to be giving, but I don't think we have to give everything all the time to just whoever asks, to where we're just drained, like I think we do have to set limits, and that's just where there's a balance there.
Right. I was full on only positive on this. I was like, yeah, boundaries are great. It gives you the ability to be healthy and thrive. And so I'm glad to hear that. I know that can have a negative connotation, but I was like, yes, I love the boundaries.
Well, yeah, I think the ones that feel good are ones that make people feel more comfortable and happier in relationships. And the ones that feel bad are the ones that make people feel excluded and left out and like not really sure of what their place is. So I really do think that it's in the eye of the person, maybe like having to toe the boundary as to how the boundary feels sometimes. I don't know.
And I would say personally, I think the reason I react so positively to how I feel about boundaries is because I have personal boundaries for my own self. And I know when I'm thriving in those, and I know when I'm not. And I live so much happier and healthier when I have my boundaries in place for my own personal health, sleep, food, friendships, and that is getting uncomfortable sometimes and saying yes to things I don't normally say yes to. So it's not excluding things. It's actually just kind of boundaries for myself to live.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's protective.
Well, what are some areas that you guys find having boundaries helpful? And the first thing you put down, Julie, was in marriage. And I was thinking, well, what boundaries do I have in marriage? I mean, I guess there were some obvious ones, like you can't cheat on each other. But, I was wondering, like,
don't take food off my plate. That's my French fry.
But I was trying to think of what boundaries you guys have in marriage. What are just some of the ones that came to mind?
Well, after I put this out there, I thought, do I have any? I don't know that I do, but I mean, we just have conversations and we work things out. I don't know that there's any hard set boundaries, but I just kind of thought of others maybe in general. Like, I know a woman who doesn't have any male Facebook friends because she wants to be above reproach. Like, it promotes trust in her marriage because there's a place for secret conversations. And that may seem totally silly to some people, but she has a great marriage. And I just think that that's probably not considered enough these days. I mean, I have male Facebook friends on my Facebook, but and just, being accountable and not talking, having the boundary of not talking badly about your spouse in front of others, letting them talk badly about your spouse.
Yes.
There could certainly be boundaries in communication, like maybe you lay out how you're going to argue, like,
True.
Like, this is acceptable, this is not. I think that's probably a pretty important one.
Very healthy.
But again, I don't think we've ever just written those out. We kind of just know that about each other.
Yeah, Bryce knows. So I set my coffee pot every night, and he knows he's not allowed to use the Keurig because you can make the carafe, and I can set that up in the morning, or you can also do the coffee pods in it. And so he knows, don't touch it. If the timer is set for the morning, you're not allowed to mess with my coffee maker. So unfortunately, Bryce, that's mine. That's my coffee maker.
Any chocolate that looks like it's hidden is hidden. Don't touch it.
That's right. I know the box of cereal you brought me, Marie.
Right.
It's hidden. It's mine.
She has a boundary around it. So yeah, I mean, we're laughing at some of these, but there can be serious ones. There can be silly ones. Even the silly ones, though, could cause, if you don't respect, if you're out to dinner and you're not respecting the other person's boundary, just freely eating off their plate, they're going to be annoyed and you're going to have a less pleasant experience than you would have had if you had just waited until they were done and then they passed their plate to you.
Very true. Very true.
Okay, well, what about parenting? What kind of boundaries have been helpful, or do you guys find some boundaries are helpful in parenting?
There's one major one that Bryce and I have had to stick to, and it's just made parenting easier because we have just this hard and fast rule. And that is mom and dad agree with one another. So hands down, don't even try. Don't even try to get me to ask me something you've already asked your dad or vice versa, because my first question or Bryce's first question, and we had to learn this, was, what did mom say? Or what did dad say? Okay, that's what I think. And if Bryce and I disagree, the kid will not know right then. We will discuss that and figure out what we think about this issue. But for the kid, they just need to know, hands down, mom and dad agree. And it just has made things simpler.
Yeah, that's really all I could think of too, is that you need to be on the same page with discipline. And I'm not saying we always were. Like, that's not always easy.
No.
But you have to figure out a way to get there, and preferably not in front of in front of the kids.
Yeah, for boundaries, I was thinking about more for like different ages, then my role falls off. And I don't have a say in that anymore. maybe I can tell my opinion, but I don't get to make the final decision. Or, like just, I don't know. I think there are different boundaries that I've had for my kids that when they are old enough to make a decision like X, Y, or Z, then okay, that's on them. And you do learn that, because I would honestly say that my oldest probably had less freedom to make her own decisions than my youngest. And that's just because you grow as a parent. But I can remember, even when it got time to like pick your high school courses and decide what you want to take, what? I pretty much left that up to them. I wasn't in there, with the oldest, I was in there more like approving what she picked and urging her to do such and such. But after that, I was kind of like, you know what the classes are. You know what level you want to strive for. You know how it's going to turn out. You be in charge of that. Like, I don't want that decision on me anymore, because I don't have enough information to make the best decision for you in that area.
It's kind of like a funnel. We always envisioned it like a funnel. You start off with tight controls where you need to, because they can't make those decisions as toddlers and elementary schools, and the funnel just gradually opens up.
Right.
And it is easier with your younger children.
Yeah, it is.
And it's true. A little, maybe more appropriately,
Yeah, what I saw with my oldest child was I didn't always know best. But it takes one kid to make you learn that you don't always know best. And then with the second one, you're a little more willing to let them trust their own instincts.
It's true. And it's, I totally agree with both of you on this. And my high school boys now with, picking the things, activities, sports, service projects, classes, or even, the programming that they choose to do at school, dual enrollment, AP, IB, there's all these different options. And I'm so thankful. I'm totally hands off now. I'm like, if you're going to decide to do that, you're the one that's committing to it. I can't force you to do the extra work. I can't force you to do the extra practices for that activity. And so this is totally like, is this something you want to commit to? Because I'm not going to be the one reminding, nagging, like you have to want to do it. At the same time, I'm not as worried about that. But then I have a son that lives in Kansas, and I kind of, Bryce and I both had to draw the line. He had an injury that he was dealing with, and his parents, you're like, I'm concerned for his physical body, and we're separate by a lot of miles. Our hands are tied. We can't do anything for him, because we would have, okay, you're going to the doctor, we're going to see this person. No, he's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, I mean, we can't force him to do anything. And we have to just leave it in his hands. Like, he's 20 years old, and he is fine now, just so you guys know. But in the moment, like Bryce and I are like, oh, we want to come in and make those decisions for him, and we cannot.
Yeah. All right. Well, boundaries at work, that was another category.
Yeah, I mean, having not worked very much, in an official capacity, that's not something I really struggled with. When I was at work, I always just wanted to be at home, so there was no danger of me putting in a lot of overtime or bringing work home.
Right.
But I know we do kind of live in an always on culture, so there may be a time where you set limits on yourself if you're a workaholic, or like, I'm only going to check emails these twice a day and then I'm done, or I'm not going to take on too much overtime. I think that's something you have to discuss with your spouse, if that's an issue with the other person,
right.
Maybe set those boundaries together, of what's acceptable for both of you.
Yeah, I think that is a constant conversation. And my take on this was, I do see myself as having a job. And there are things that I do purposefully get done, since I am blessed, and we do sacrifice for me to stay at home. So I am going to see my work hours as getting all the things done, so that then I can have that time later that I'm not getting things done that, I try to get the grocery shopping done. I try to do any errands, laundry, cleaning the house, because to me, I'm using my day as work, and I want to be intentional about that time. At the same time, my other thought was, Bryce and I have different boundaries here. If I'm having a conversation on my phone when Bryce is home, he's the priority to me. Whereas if somebody from work contacts Bryce at home after hours, he actually has to respond. And so I can actually, my job, in air quotes, can wait. His cannot. And I'm okay with that. And so I just know that we have different boundaries there. So even if we're out to dinner and something happens and he has to take a phone call, I'm cool with that. I mean, it's just the nature of his job. And so, but again, that's not my boundary.
Right.
I would ignore the phone all day long.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have any boundaries that are helpful for you in friendships? I don't know that I've ever had to set a lot of boundaries in friendships, but
will y'all let me read something?
Sure.
This is kind of what spurred this conversation. I follow this lady on Instagram. She claims to be a boundaries expert.
And I like how you say claims to be.
But I mean, I don't know if she is or not, but she posted, here are a few boundary suggestions for friends. Okay. Boundaries with your friends sound like, I'm not able to help you with your party, but I will be there to support you. When I share personal things with you, please don't share our conversations with other people. I want to be here for you and I'm concerned, but I just don't have the emotional capacity to help you with your issue.
Boy, these don't really sound that nice.
Okay. Stop bringing up my past. It's not relevant to who I am now. Don't bring up my ex. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. I need you to listen to me. I don't want any advice. Before you start talking about yourself, could you please ask me about how I'm doing? Okay. Have you ever had to say any of those things to people?
No. And I wouldn't even want to be your friend because there's so many rules. I already forgot what the first one is. So I know I'm going to be breaking them left and right because I can't remember all those rules.
Okay. So then I started to look into the comments because, we've said before, that's where all the good stuff is.
Yeah.
So I highlighted a few comments.
Oh, good.
A lot of them were very positive. They were like, right on, this is exactly what I needed to hear. But then the funny ones were, sounds like you need new friends. People are too afraid to cut people out of their lives. Stop giving energy to those who don't deserve it. Limiting the amount of myself I give has changed my life. So that was a positive one. But this one, if you use any of these routinely, you are probably a very lonely person.
Well,
right?
That's how I would feel.
I know. Some of these have so much heat behind them. I've never had to say anything like this to a close friend. It was crazy to see who jumped off board when I set these boundaries. Like, do you want people to jump off board?
Yeah. Yeah. And where did you set them? Did you publish them on your personal Facebook page or something?
Right. How do people know?
Oh, and then this one girl said, and this is why I don't have friends. Because she apparently tells people these things.
Oh, my goodness.
And then, one lady said, yeah, it gets easier with time and age, to say these kind of things. And it's like, gosh, I don't know. This is where I started to kind of fear the whole boundaries thing. It's like, this is
wow.
Right.
Well, it sounds like you're setting rules for everybody else to interact with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if I told you all those things, Julie, and then I said, hey, do you want to walk this week? You'd be like, no, thanks.
Scared to death.
What are we going to talk about? Well, I think that it's you're focused, like if I want friends and I know that to have friendships and to have relationships, I'm going to be offended every now and then. It's natural for that to happen. How I respond to that is up to me. And I've come across very few things that I felt that I actually had to talk about and say, hey, this thing or this timing or
Here's another one that you put down, Julie. Spiritual life. I wasn't really sure what you meant by boundaries for this. Did you and Mindy have any thoughts on that?
I did. I immediately thought of Jesus set a boundary in the temple when he cleaned it out, when he got angry and he said, no, this place should be, this is my house. And he cleaned his house. And so I love that example because it was a time where it was important enough that he put his foot down and he said, no, this will not happen in my house. And so I appreciated that. And then one boundary, I have had to memorize these verses before, and I'll read them and then I'll tell you why I thought of them. So it's Ephesians 4:29 and 30. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. The reason I love both of those verses together is because I feel that it tells us what to say, and that's not grieving the Holy Spirit in a relationship. And it tells us what not to say. If it's not helpful for that person, if it's not building the other person up for their needs, then don't say it. And so to me, I felt like that was a really good boundary as we interact with each other.
Yeah, I definitely believe that boundaries are biblical and that they're exemplified in the scriptures by Jesus, and then the Proverbs, I think, are full of admonitions to choose wise friends. Like Proverbs 13:20 says, we become wise by walking with the wise. Our life falls apart if we surround ourselves with fools. Obviously, that is a boundary. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron. That infers confrontation, disagreement. You know what I mean? Like that just infers that. There's admonition to flee temptation, like making decisions, setting limits once and for all about things that might tempt you, or setting that boundary before you're in that. We've talked about that with our kids a lot, like setting that boundary before you're even in that temptation. Making a decision once, not every time you're faced with that temptation. And I thought, did Jesus set boundaries? Because some of these things we've talked about have seemed so harsh. And, I think Jesus did set boundaries. Like when he was teaching a crowd, his mother and brothers showed up and were trying to get his attention. And it says he did not respond immediately. Like, I think that's an example of a boundary. Like he finished what he was doing because that was the priority. And then he addressed his mother and brothers. And it wasn't disrespectful to say, this is not the time,
Right.
And after feeding the 5,000, it said he slipped off and went back up to the mountains to be by himself. And even though Jesus is God, he also submitted to a human body and to the weaknesses and limitations. So he needed time alone. He needed rest. And so I think that points to setting limits for ourselves. And then one other example, when Jesus's parents were walking and they noticed he was missing, they went. This scripture's always kind of been funny to me because I always thought Jesus sounded kind of disrespectful. But he asked his parents when they found him in the temple. He asked, well, why didn't you know this is where I would be about my Father's business? And I think that is another example of Jesus knowing he was separate from his parents. Like he had his own ideas, his own values. He had his own things he was supposed to do. He knew who he was and he knew who he was not. And I think that's good for us to realize that our kids have their own ideas, have their own places in the world.
Julie, one more example. And I actually thought this was a funny example, but it's so telling. And it's with Mary and Martha. And Jesus in this instance, I think sets the right boundary for us to have is, Martha's boundaries were different than Mary's boundaries. Martha saw her role as a servant and preparing the meal, and she thought Mary should have the exact same boundaries as her. And when Mary didn't, she got mad and even told Jesus to tell her to help me, which I love that's in the Bible, because we can all relate with Martha at that point. But I love that Jesus says, Mary's chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. And so that is a boundary that I think is the priority, is that time with him, where he's always setting himself as I am the ultimate source of your life, your whole life. And if I tell you to do this, or if I tell you to do that, it could disrupt what you've chosen for yourself. But you need to listen to me. And so I do love that situation, that family relationship there.
And I think maybe the difference too, like Jesus obviously set boundaries and modeled them, but they weren't focused on like feelings as the top priority,
Right.
I guess there was a little self-care in there in his alone time, but it wasn't just getting his own way or focusing on feelings. They weren't really spoken boundaries.
Right.
Like, don't cross this line or else.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about boundaries and using them in healthy and maybe not so healthy ways, because I think we've established that we need boundaries. We have, even if we don't think we have many boundaries, all of us have unspoken boundaries and things that most people would pick up on as a boundary. And I think we've kind of talked about the healthy ways to use boundaries. I think for our discussion and the reason that we felt we needed to talk about it was just because we get so scared with the culture of boundaries right now that we're afraid of being cut off from people we love because they've decided that they need to draw a boundary. And so, I don't know, what do you guys think about like the ways that boundaries are sometimes misused?
I think the difference in healthy and unhealthy might be with the intentions behind the boundary. Like, if it's to protect yourself or maybe to protect someone else in your care from being hurt, then that's obviously a good boundary. But if it's just to put distance there because you want to exclude someone or even hurt them or repay them for how they've hurt you, or even just passive resistance, that is not a healthy boundary. And this is just something that's been on my mind a lot because I know several people that have been cut off from their children recently. Actually, 3 people I know very, very well. And then as I've had conversations with friends and moms, they are hearing it too. And I don't know if it's like an unintentional extension of cancel culture kind of creeping in, but it just seems like so many people and families are cutting off siblings or parents or children. And I'm involved in a mom's like mentoring group, and even some moms there said that it had affected their family. And I had lunch with a friend the other day, and she said she had some time with her daughter, and her daughter mentioned to her, "Oh yes, so and so." Like several of my friends no longer speak to their mothers, and we were just kind of grieved over that, that. Like Marie, you said one day when we were talking about this, are there really that many terrible mothers out there? Like, can it be that?
Yeah,
that they really deserve this? And in the cases that I know personally, the parents don't even know why. That's the cruel part, I think, is that it's not a boundary like, oh, you've crossed this multiple times and I can't deal with it. They've just cut them off. And I just think that's the cruelest of things you could do to a parent. And, where's the discussion? Where's the, let's make this work? A boundary should have the goal of restoration and inclusivity and reconciliation. I just think it's very unfair to cut someone off and not give them the chance. Like, if it's cutting you off because of something you did in the past, well, like people need second chances. People need a chance to do it right. And you're taking that away from them when
right.
cut off.
Yeah. And I think that what's scary too is I think people think of themselves in a vacuum. And I'm not saying that I didn't do immature things and get in fight with family members when I'm young. I mean, we've all done immature and stupid things, but I think like when you completely cut someone out of your life, you are not thinking about, okay, yes, you're cutting yourself off, but you're also cutting your kids off from that person. You are setting an example that we just cut people out when we don't like what they're doing. So you've cut your relationship off with their kids. You've cut, there's so many multifaceted relationships and families. You can't just unilaterally just cut one out and have the other ones not affected.
Right. Well, in those instances, and we have all agreed, apart from abuse, apart from, evil being done, harmful behavior, you have to ask yourself, is there forgiveness that I can show in a situation? And honestly, the overarching thing is, where is the love? Because Jesus said in the New Testament that the 2 greatest commandments were to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. So what is that, how are we loving our neighbor, and then the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, look at all the descriptions of love in there: patient, kind, it isn't envy, doesn't boast, it's not proud, doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. I mean, and it keeps going. It protects, it trusts, it hopes, it perseveres. And in any relationship, are you loving that person? Is that a relationship that needs forgiveness? Do you need to ask for forgiveness? Because you will have conflict. Anytime there's two people together, you are naturally going to have conflict. But if you truly love that person, then you're going to seek for that restoration, Julie, that you just mentioned. And so it's so much bigger than our selfish desires and needs. And I'm not perfect at that. I do have to ask forgiveness. I do step on toes, and other people step on my toes. And it just is going to happen.
Right. I think if you think about how annoying someone might be, how annoyed you are by them, you have to remember, I'm probably annoying them equally as
right.
Like that just happens when you're in close relationships with family and extended family. And, I just, we're really good at wanting grace and mercy for our own mistakes. And then we just throw the law at everybody else,
Yeah.
Like these are my expectations, but I want all the grace and mercy for my mistakes.
I was just thinking about this now when you were talking, Mindy and Julie. Like, I think the reason that the boundary conversation is so scary to us, because it used to be that when we or other people moved to I'm just cutting them off, it was a shameful thing, and like society would still urge you to work that out, and like it would be like, yes, that's a human nature, like, well, I'm just not going to talk to them anymore. But society moved against that. Like, it wasn't easy to do that. Like, you would be ashamed to say that you were having this conflict, and you would almost be like culturally forced to get through it. Like, for generations and generations, we've had relationships like that. I feel like now at this point in culture, it's like, oh, well, someone did something to me, and now all of culture stands up and says, cut him out of your life. Don't ever talk to him again. You go, girl. You don't need them. Blah, blah. Instead of saying, like, try to find a way to work it out. It's so important for these relationships. Culture is now screaming, eliminate them from your life. And I think that's the scary part. There used to be societal pressure to keep up relationships, to keep up friendships. And now society just says, forget about them.
Right. It is countercultural, kind of what we're talking about right now, but it is biblical. And I think, I don't know, I feel like most of the people I meet, I feel like desire this. And if you desire to have healthy, thriving, good relationships, there's going to be bumps in the road, but there's a personal boundary that I kind of had to be okay with. And that is, sometimes I'm going to be offended, and it's okay. And we have talked about that, letting, if a dart comes at you, to kind of be smoke and let it pass through, and let those offenses go. But I think that is a maturing aspect as well. And it's more difficult sometimes than others to kind of let those offenses go. But
well, Mindy, just last week I stayed with you, and I said something on a walk that I then thought later, not while I was walking, but I thought to myself, oh, she probably took offense at that, or could have, or could.
Okay, right.
And remember, the next day I brought it up to you because I didn't want you to have taken offense. And you were like, oh, no, I didn't. But like, I wanted to make sure that the air was cleared. And so, but I would have hoped that if you had been offended, rather than just say, well, I'm never having Marie in my house again.
Oh my gosh.
But I feel like there's no conversation, almost no conversation, that you're talking about real topics and issues, that there's not the potential for offending someone.
Right.
Yeah. See if you guys think this is a good example, because I've talked to a lot of friends about this. And last weekend I was with kind of an old friend, and she had a good example. She said she was in the car with her daughter, and her daughter was really down, and she just wasn't happy with the class she was taking. This was a college class. And she said, I think I'm going to drop it because I just don't like the teacher anymore. And she said, oh, why not? What happened? I thought you liked her. And she said, well, she skinny shamed me. And this my friend pulled the car over and said, what do you mean by that? And she said, the teacher said something like, you need to eat more. You look too thin. And I do think that's probably totally inappropriate to say in front of a big group, in a classroom setting in front of everybody.
Oh, yeah.
But my friend pulled the car over and said, wait a minute. She said, you are not a victim here. She said, there are people out there suffering as victims with real things. They are really victims. Please tell me that you are not a victim here, that you're saying you are being shamed for having a beautiful, perfect body. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you're saying, really, because she said she has a really cute figure, perfect size, And I think it just goes deeper into like what we allow, where we get our identity, what we allow other people to control.
Right.
Like that. I do think that was an inappropriate thing to say, but I was just really proud of my friend for saying, wait a minute.
Yeah, you don't have to be a victim to that.
Not a victim, no. And I think that is contributing to a lot of this, is the victim mentality.
Well, and you can't avoid every conversation or situation where somebody might have said something that made you feel uncomfortable, or like, I don't know. You just
like
can't
dropping the class. I mean,
yeah,
that could affect her
class
whole
over that.
Her whole career, like her whole schedule and
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we hope that happens even with this episode, is just that, like you're going to be okay when you're offended, and that, that there can be forgiveness and there can be conversations. And Maria, I like that simple example of you saying, hey, did that offend you yesterday? And I had not even thought about it, but I think that that's the mentality, is having a real relationship with somebody so that you're not hiding everything or tiptoeing around subjects because you're afraid, but that also, if something comes to your mind in the quiet of the night, that you would come back to that person and say, oh, hey, did this bother you when I did that? Because I really didn't want to hurt our relationship. I care about you enough to apologize if there needs to be an apology, but I think that that's just trying to be a little more self-aware, knowing that you're going to make mistakes. And so then having compassion when other people put their foot in their mouth with you, because it goes both ways.
And it could be that Cindy thought to herself, well, it wasn't that, Marie, but there were 10 other things that you said. But I'm thinking about like family relationships. Like, you might be getting an apology for this one thing that didn't even bother you, but you have 16 examples from the past 20 years where they said something that burned you up.
Okay.
Like, you're just going to have to probably understand that they don't even remember or realize they obviously care about you,
Listen, and we talked about this. This is a harder, deeper, more difficult subject when we talked about our forgiveness episode a long time ago. Some people will never apologize. And some of those people are people that need to stay in your life. Period.
Yeah.
And you're going to be offended every time, and they're never going to apologize. And that is the nature of that relationship.
Yeah. But you're still going to have a relationship.
Right.
I'd like to add, if it's with family too, like, and even in the situation you just mentioned between you and Marie, like, it's always best to talk about it not in the moment, I think.
Oh, right.
Like if you had just said, that offends me, or if you'd said it in a public setting.
Right.
And I think this can be done more in a family situation, like, you always say that, or you always do that. And you lose the chance to let that person know your intention. Like, if your intention is really out of love and you want things to be better, it is not going to come across that way in public, because they're going to get defensive and they're going to be hurt. And it's embarrassing. Like, you don't want to see people working things out in a group. I think it's better to go to them in private, and nobody wants to be schooled in public. It's just,
I know. And if you're angry about it, you need to get a control of that before you respond.
Mm-hmm.
Get your emotions under control, process, do not respond. It's funny. I worked with a really good friend of mine, and she joked that my job was to help her not respond on Facebook when she got offended right away. Like she had an immediate response, and I would be like, don't do it. She's like, Mindy, I'm going to need your help because I want to say this right now. And I'm like, not better. Step away, walk away. Because I think that, our first response is attack, like protect yourself, and you hurt. So I'm going to hurt back. And that is our natural inclination. But, take a breath, count to 10. I mean, there's all these things that you've talked about. And sometimes it's best to sleep on it and give some time so that you can figure out that, oh yeah, I do love them and I do want to save this relationship. Probably better not talk to them until I'm feeling the love again.
Yeah. Well, we're moving into the time of year that probably more relationships are destroyed between Thanksgiving and the New Year than any other time. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek, not destroyed. But you know what? There's a lot of fraught situations. And we just kind of wanted to end this episode on kind of a lighthearted, but yet serious note, because a lot of people are going to have family come in and even have family stay with you. And it could be family from out of town that you don't interact with all the time. And I guess we just wanted to give some tips for just not ending up, how do you keep boundaries in those situations? Mindy, you had some thoughts on this.
I do feel that you have to know going into seasons when you are going to have a lot more interactions that your boundaries are going to have to be a little more flexible. And so I also think maybe you can set some other boundaries, and those boundaries might have to change day by day if you're having people actually stay in your home, because then you don't have time to kind of get away and rest and recover. And so because anytime you're with other people, because your immediate family, you kind of end up you kind of know each other's boundaries. But when you have anyone that lives outside of your home, and that could be your adult children coming home, their boundaries are so different than yours. So there's going to be conflict that happens so easily, bedtimes, wake up times, how many cups of coffee do you drink? Oh, you just took the whole pot. I wanted some of that. I mean, I say that, but that can be an easy way when you have a lot of people in the house that you can get easily upset. And so there's some things that I do try to do when I am going to have a lot of people, because I do host both Thanksgiving and Christmas. I do have people in my home. Our family is distant. And so we have to stay together, which I love, but I have to go to bed at a good time. I try to wake up and have some time alone before I am interacting. I still make sure that I steal away to go work out, because I know that if I can sweat or be outside or get a workout in, I'm naturally healthier in my mind and can tackle the things. And so I just think about, first of all, intentionally knowing you gotta be ready and have a plan. I don't know. How about y'all?
Well, I'm not great about this all the time, but I do think that you should ask yourself the question, at this moment, for this visit, is the relationship or the boundary more important? Because this family event is going to end in a defined period of time, whether it's tonight, 2 days. But don't we want to end on a good note? My kids tease me because I always want to end everything on a good note. Right. But I do just feel can we just hold it together and end on a good note? Because a lot of those things, once the event is over, are just going to dissipate. Do we need to hash it out? Because probably not even going to care about it in a week. Because I don't live with you every day. You know what I'm saying? So I do feel like you could just maybe understand that even if that person is annoying you or crossing a boundary, you're probably crossing a boundary inadvertently with them too. Yeah. You're not perfect either. And I'm speaking to myself. It's really easy to always think that everything that we're doing is perfect and everything the other person is doing. What were they, raised in a barn? But, we just...
Right. Yeah. I don't know. When you mentioned holiday boundaries, I just thought, okay, what would those even be? And maybe just knowing your limits for hosting. I need a nap. I need to go to bed earlier. I need to go to my workout. Because often I think, if my family's here, for 3 or 4 days, I'm not going to go to my workout and miss 2 hours of time with them. But maybe I should. Maybe that makes me feel better, and I should. So maybe topics of discussion, what you're going to say are off limits. We're just not going to talk about. Because you said you want to end it on a good note. Well, sometimes maybe it won't be if
no.
Right.
talk about something that should be off limits.
Recently, I hosted a bunch of family, and I sent out text messages beforehand and said, do not bring up these topics, and named them. Like,
wow.
That's okay to do. Yeah. And I didn't say it in a mean way, but
Right.
I was just like, we're trying to go for this type of vibe, so don't talk about these things. That's okay.
Right.
Keep going, Julie.
Right.
You were still
that's
moving.
a good one. And I think that's and I actually think everybody probably understands that. It takes some longer than others, but but I think after you've experienced that, you realize we just don't need to go there, Another one during the holidays could be gift giving, like how much you give, what you give. Like different families have different I guess it's not a boundary, it's more like a preference. And you just want to honor those. I do. So kind of seek out what their expectations are and
Right.
be careful about that. So that's all I could really think of. Just more for me, it was just setting limits so that I don't totally exhaust myself.
I was going to say probably the biggest issue for people that are hosting or for moms, even if you don't have out-of-town company, the biggest issue is that we tend to not respect our own boundaries, and then we crash and burn. We don't take any time for ourselves. We say, I'm going to just give my all for this whole week period, and by the end we're not even able to focus on one conversation. All we can think about is how tired and what a martyr we are. And if we would have just drawn some lines and said, okay, well, I'm willing to do this much and you guys are going to have to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
My family might be here for Thanksgiving for a week, and I'm thrilled. I'm excited.
Yes.
But I'm already like planning in my mind. I'm planning menus, planning things. And it's like, you want to make it the best and the greatest, like everything has to just be over the top perfect. And I've kind of learned, especially now in the season I'm in, I just can't do that because I don't even have the bandwidth to go there like I used to.
Right.
And I hope my family understands that. Like I want it to be great, but it might look different than it has in the past.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think? Should we all hold each other accountable not to crash and burn this holiday season?
Don't let me go there.
Pace yourself. Look, it's a marathon. It is.
Yeah.
And to run a marathon, you've got to stretch beforehand. You have to put on the right clothes and shoes, and you have to eat the right foods. And during the race, you have to hydrate. You have to have some nutrition along the way. And so you got to go to the bathroom. I mean, there's a reason that marathon runners will eat gummies, hydrate, and stop at a porta potty. So I just think that to get to the end and end on a good note, because I do love that, Marie. I feel the same way. Let's at least stay positive and see you next year. No, I'm kidding. It's just you gotta, nutrition along the way, help along the way. Because we can't just give, die, and then expect to have a good relationship.
I know. Yeah. All right. Well, listeners, we would love to hear from you on maybe you completely disagree with us on the issue of boundaries, and we'd still love to hear from you. But I just think that boundaries do bring up a lot of food for thought. So you can find us on Instagram. You can message us at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Like we said, we are not experts. So we've probably gone against what experts would say. But these are just things that maybe we are experts in our own little quarters of the world, that we found these things work and these things don't, but maybe not for everybody. We don't know.
Right.
We're highly opinionated non-experts.
Right.
I love it.
At least we're not like that Instagrammer, though, that claim to be experts. We don't even claim.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mindy and Julie. It's always good to talk about these topics. I I think we always assume that other people aren't having these problems in their lives with boundaries or whatever the issue is. And when you can find out that these kinds of things are universal the world over, it really makes it less of a hill to tackle and more of something that, yes, I can pick up what they're doing and what they're doing, and I can do this. I can do this.
Can't we all just get along?
We might not all get along, but we're going to end on a good note.
That's right. Exactly.
All right, Mindy and Julie, we will talk to you next week.
Okay. Sounds great. Bye, girls.
Bye. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.